With infinite complacence, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space.
On this episode of Into the Fray, Jon Paul Capece, M.T.S. returns. And if you guys didn't know, our first episode was just about exactly 7 years ago. He has been on for 84, 89, 113, 262, 265, 366, and of course, Patreon episodes that include a little sub-show that he and I created together, Odd and Obscure with JP. So this episode, though, will be not only a Demonology 101 refresher course, in essence, but JP will also share how his opinions and interests have changed over the years. Jon Paul, welcome back onto Into the Fray.
Hello. It's awesome to be back on the main feed. I think it's been a minute since I've been on here, which is really, really cool. But I think it's a good opportunity to do this, considering that it's been 7 years since we rolled this out as kind of a Demonology 101, abridged, of course. And yeah, I mean, things have changed vastly in the podcasting world in the past 7 years. And it seems like there's a lot going on, particularly with paranormal, 14, whatever you want to call it, type of podcasts coming up. I would say that you are one of the pioneers, at least in my eyes, going back that far. Anyway,
I appreciate that.
Still,
I mean,
successful.
Lots before me. Lots of people came before me. Fantastic folks, and I was definitely listening to plenty of podcasts before I even became a podcaster. So, but I do appreciate that. But I do know that you reached out to me, and I've told this story before, but I'll say it again. Yeah. And it seems like we do tend to talk quite a bit because you are over on Patreon side so much. So, but main feed, it's been a while, as you mentioned. So when Jon Paul emailed me, 7 years ago, and I had been doing the show for a few years at that point, a couple years, whatever. And he had his title after his name. Of course, he has a master's in theological studies. That's what the M.T.S. stands for. Okay. He's master's degree. So he's a theologian and he knows a ton about demonology, but his email was very non-threatening. He wasn't trying to puff up his chest at all, but I still felt inside going, can I handle a decent interview with this person who is so well-read and so knowledgeable on these subjects, right? And it actually turned into one of the best flowing and most enjoyable episodes for me, because I really was just coming from a place of, I don't know anything about this stuff, or very, very teeny tiny little bit, drop in a bucket compared to you. So the conversation just flew by and we got through a ton of great information, right? About Demonology 101, which I know I would ask I can't even remember what kinds of questions I asked back then. I don't even think I'd want to listen to I hate listening to myself now, so I can imagine on episode 84 what I sounded like. But part of this today, as I said, is the fact that not only personally has your even interest in this change, but you wanted to go back through and talk about what you did before and how your views and opinions on those things have even changed. But before we get there, can we just briefly mention the fact, and this is covered on 84, so IGF 84, everybody can go back and hear detailed questions, because we're not going to go through that again here. That's not what this episode is about. Right. You did have a demonic experience when you were young, right? I mean, that's where pretty much it, just like I had when I was 12 years old, I had my little inception into, this stuff is out there and real, and we're not the only things inhabiting this space, right?
Right. And that is what I think I started calling a confirmation experience. Whether whatever it was demonic in nature, I still struggle with that today. But the fact is, like, something happened that was outside of like the parameters of what I would consider like normal life, that kind of sent me down the rabbit hole, which I think is what happens to a lot of people who kind of start listening to this stuff, is they have something happen to them and they're like, oh, hey, that's like, I mean, I guess the paranormal world can come knocking, or it can come thrashing and banging. For me, it was more of a knock, but it was enough to get me snooping down the rabbit hole. Some people have had some like right in your face, type of hairy biped encounters. Not me, but yeah, that was something that and besides the fact too, I've always kind of had my head in the clouds for all things, religious and philosophical and spiritual. Just growing up as a result, part and parcel to that experience, maybe. But yeah, I mean, I will talk about that a little bit there too. And it is my hope, honestly, Shannon, that people do go back and listen to those episodes, because I did, and as much as I hate hearing myself on the recordings, and I like, if I make a mistake or something like that, or I give out bad information, which happens, I'm like, oh my God, you fool. I can't remember. I say something like, you know what I mean? That was my big one 7 years ago. I said it like 400 times an episode. Like, you know what I mean? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and
That's
then
like
we
snapping an elastic
decided,
very
yeah,
cool.
you would put a rubber band around your
Yes.
wrist or something, right?
Yeah, it was rough. But like, whenever I do this with you, when anything that I've ever done with you has just been me sitting in front of my little microphone here. And I don't know, maybe this is poor planning. I generally don't come quote unquote prepared. I'm not. Sometimes I'm rifling through books if we're having like a Q&A type thing, but largely this is me. This is my experience. You ask me a question, I either know it or I don't. And as we'll get to maybe towards the end of the episode, some of the stuff that's happening in the paranormal podcast community now, I think more people could adapt that. It's okay to say I don't know type of attitude. But anyway, yeah, that little experience I had, I can't remember the name of the artist who drew the picture. I want to give him credit. Do you
Chris
know who it
Holm.
was? Yes, it was, because it's so spot on. And I think it's because, I mean, I gave a great description of it. I know I did, because like that thing has been burned in my head from when I was,
Yeah.
whatever, 8, 9, 10 years old. And we spent a lot of time talking about what that thing looked like. But essentially, I remember talking about going in early morning, running in and like jumping in bed. My mom and dad had like the giant, king bed, and I remember jumping in there. I don't know, early in the morning, like 5 o'clock. As my dad had left for work, and I kind of jumped in there to sleep for the last hour or so before I had to wake up to go to school. And sometime in that hour, I remember just waking up for there's something compelled me to wake up. Didn't hear a noise or anything like that. I remember something compelled me to wake up, and I sat up in bed, and there at the end of the bed was this thing that looked like a chubby gremlin, and it had like these pig ears that were like coming out of its head, like of a sideways shaped football head with pig ears, and a mouth that went from end to end with a bunch of teeth. Like, it was so like there. I mean, up until that point in my brief existence, if it was a dream, I certainly had not experienced a dream like that, or since. It was so like there, you know what I mean? And like the skin and the texture, and it was green, and it was portly. It was a chubby guy, and it was interacting with me in a weird type of way. I remember looking at it and like freaking out naturally, and then putting my head under the covers, as one does, because that's the safe space. And then I remember waiting, or head under the pillow type thing, and then popping my head up, and it was still there. And at that point, I remember it kind of beckoned me, like its hand forward, like, come here. It didn't say that, but it was definitely telling me to come there. And I remember shaking my head and throwing my stuffed alligator at it, which I think someone else drew a picture of me vanquishing it with the alligator, which is pretty hilarious. And I don't remember seeing it disappear. It didn't, poof. There was no noise, no pop. It didn't dissipate. It was just there, and then it was not there. And my alligator hit the TV behind it. And it was just such a weird experience. I don't know if I did it justice this time around. I know the first time around, we spent probably a half an hour or more talking about it, but that is essentially the story of the little chubby gremlin.
Yeah, we went into a lot more detail, and as I said, I implore everybody to go back to 84 and listen to that very first episode. That was a really great chat that we had. And you said, "Oh, I don't normally come prepared," but I don't think either one of us ever really have for our chats, as far as
Yeah.
they do go off on such tangents, but the tangents turn out to be wonderful tangents. So I think
I
that's
think
just
so.
always been our MO. However, we were texting back and forth, and you said, "Oh, do you have these notes that I sent?" It was one of the very first emails before,
Yeah.
I think it was before 84 and not 89, right? And you sent along
Yeah.
like 2 pages of notes, and you're kind of going, "Well, here's a little bit of an outline of what we're going to be chatting about." So what you wanted to do today is touch on certain points that we have already covered that you either feel like you misspoke or you wanted to add to, or that your opinions have changed on.
Yeah, I mean, also to kind of highlight the stuff. My email, the oh god, which one is still active? The one I had started years ago, live.deep.know.truth at gmail.com, separated by periods. Live, period truth. That's still active. So I guess my hope that people may, because this is main feed, people may send out some stuff to that email still. It's been out there, it's been open and active for the past 7 years. First, I really just wanted to use it as a repository for stories. Not necessarily what you're doing, but more like straight, a demonic type of activity stories. And, I thought maybe of compiling a book. I thought of a podcast at some point in my life. Now things are a little bit different. I still like the idea of collecting stories. So being back on the main feed, I was thinking about, why not keep that email active? And then maybe people hear this, maybe people go back and listen to the first few episodes. Maybe something, strikes a chord and they send off a story or something. But as of now, I think that, being a collector of stories is something that I'm still interested in doing. So that's another reason why I want to do this now. So I guess kind of hitting on some of the highlights of like, hey, like, you know, not from start to finish, but, kind of a very, very, very abridged start to finish, I guess. I'm having a hard time. I guess once we get into it, people will kind of see what we're doing. But yeah, do you want me just to dive into it? Do you want me to? What do
Yeah,
you
go
want to do
for it,
here?
wherever you want to start.
Okay. So it's important too for me to say that, like, yeah, I have a graduate degree in theology. That doesn't make me a demonologist. Lots of the stuff I did outside of school, I guess, makes me an amateur demonologist as it is. The work, anyone who's been to grad school, is just very, very, very esoteric, very specific to what you're doing. It's just notes and research. Even regular old Catholic mass stuff is really not part of the educational experience. It's very, very high in the sky philosophical stuff. I'm not saying like it's the hardest thing ever. I'm just saying it's extremely, extremely esoteric. So, but from that, in that foundation, in the discussions, some of the brief discussions I've had in there, coupled with my proclivity for the paranormal, kind of pushed me to do more of like, hey, maybe I can use some of these skills, maybe they can translate into doing some research into the paranormal. So that's important. I think the framework is important as to how I'm coming up about this stuff, because there are some things that I just don't know, like all of us. But anyway, so kind of like from the beginning, right? And this is kind of the framework in which I'm working. So that framework would be recorded history around 3000 BCE. That's kind of where I'm working with Tigris, Euphrates, River Valley. Other civilizations before that, other writing forms before that, sure, let's have the conversation, just not now. But that's where I'm coming from, okay? Tigris, Euphrates, River Valley, 3000 BCE. Sumerians, Akkadians, Akkadians being the early Hebrew and Arabic people of the time. The first creation myth that I generally keep as my background would be the Enuma Elish, which means went on high, written in Akkadian, probably around 2000 BCE. And it's a good foundation of what we talk about the early gods. And the reason why, obviously, going to a Catholic school, studying Catholic theology, these are Catholic roots, remembering that the Akkadians are the early Jews. But those early gods were chaotic, and there wasn't really a lot of good and bad. This one's good, this one's bad. They were just very chaotic. If they had emotions, they would be kind of working off those emotions. The Enema Elish is what we call a theogony. It's an evolution of the gods, how they came to be. So like a story of them. So chaos and chaos, and then I guess from that chaos and from their interactions, they kind of start to create order. The gods do. Let's see here. I don't know. Maybe the early family tree, ancient Mesopotamia. Apsu, god of sweet water, his wife Tiamat. These are like the early ones. Let's see. I'm not going to go through the whole Gilgamesh epic. A lot of correlation there with the flood and all that stuff. Anyone who's heard me talk on Patreon, we certainly got into that. As far as evil, quote unquote, gods, they do pop up, or maybe the things that they did maybe were evil. You know what I mean? So they're like evil by their actions or their behaviors informed us that maybe they were evil. So out of those first group of chaotic gods who we really don't assign, a good or bad, thing to, there was a couple that were mentioned. There's this one called Ninurta. He was a war god, a god of storms, Nergal, a god of the underworld. I think these guys were, kind of by, like I said, their behaviors or their place in the story, their actions kind of informed us that maybe they weren't so great. Let's see here. There was also a reference to an earth lion, which at some point through language has been interpreted to a serpent, and also in maybe possibly the serpent of, Catholic stories. Satan, obviously, the evil one. So yeah, it's just a very, very loose beginning, essentially, of what I was essentially taught, as a beginning. And it's important for me to, I guess, talk about this stuff, because if I just start talking about like demonology and demons and demonic possession and what it looks like, I don't think it has as much credibility. I think, and I know this shit can be dry. I get it. Like, people are probably like, well, what the hell is this? And I know that just, me personally, I'm a pretty scatterbrained person. But for me, the fact that this stuff has like some type of a historical and cultural root, I think that is important to at least just say like, hey, here, shine a flashlight on it for a second. I think it gives it some credence. You know what I mean? I think sometimes with other things in the paranormal world, people start talking about them and then they start reaching back and say, oh, but, we have a history. Well, let's talk about the history first, maybe, if you can. You know what I mean? I don't know, whatever your history of Bigfoot or history of aliens or history of Dogman and shit like that. But I think this is important because it's like been part of like the collective social zeitgeist for like 5,000 years, so I think that's important, like it's almost like I'm trying to say that there's a historical kind of footprint for the paranormal, which isn't that extreme of a thing to say. So as far as continuing with a bit of a history, if I'm boring you guys, that will continue. Early Hebrews, Genesis, around the second millennium, 1500 BCE-ish. That's where I'm putting that. Let's see here. So, talk about like old, phenomenon from 3000 to 2000 BCE. There wasn't much going on in the terms of religion as part of our history, my history. That's what we call animism. Getting info was word of mouth. Animism strive to ascribe all phenomenon to personal agencies. And since they're good and evil, so too could everything else. And animism strive to ascribe all phenomena to personal agencies. And since people are good and evil, so too could everything else. And since humanity believed in spirits at the time, spirits of the woods, animal spirits, etc., and some of these spirits were good and some evil. So also, and since people have leaders and animals have hierarchies, then maybe there is a leader of good and there is a leader of evil. God and Satan came along about 3,000 years later, but at this point, the idea of good entities and bad entities have been around since we could write. So that is, I think, kind of important. This idea that we were kind of describing what we were seeing, but we were relating everything to us. Like, hey, like we have a social structure, we have a hierarchy, we're good and bad. So perhaps this phenomenon we can't explain is also, has the same structure that we have. All right, I did briefly mention like some of the early first to third century Judeo-Christian groups, Ebionites, Marcionites, and Gnostics. those groups started to really talk about what we consider to be that kind of the relationship we see now today between, God and the devil, and angels and demons and things like that. Certainly, we talked a great deal about the Watchers, the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees. We beat that to death over the years on Discord. So become a member. But yeah, so it's a brief history. I don't want to go longer than I already did. So I think that's helpful. But yeah, I mean, any questions to that, or do you want to move into just kind of like jump right into maybe some modern day stuff?
Yeah, let's do the modern day stuff. Yes.
Okay. And feel free to cut out anything that you're like, this didn't make sense,
No,
because
this is all good stuff, dude. No way.
Cool. All right. So like the one thing over the years that everyone at some point, whenever I'm on a show, is like, all right, like, what do I do if someone is possessed, or what, how do I know, or what are the stages? What are the steps? And I know on some of those early episodes, we had put out the steps. And over the years, my approach, or I guess rather how I think about, the steps and phases and levels of demonic possession and activity, I kind of see them more or less as a spectrum as opposed to a progression. I think at one point it was like, no, this happens, then that happens, then that happens, then that happens. Over the years, I kind of have said, you know what, I think it's more of a spectrum. Certainly one can you don't have to experience, oppression or obsession in that order and then possession. You can certainly just hop right to possession, just from some of the things that I've read over the time. But, generally speaking, if there's something going on that has, demonic involvement, the church has, exorcists, the church, they have tried to kind of put like a label on each one, like, possession, of course. Full bubble, it's a full-blown situation. You got spirit interacting with soul. You've got it's in the human body, like kind of the thing that we're all familiar with. Oppression. So oppression is more of like, there's a lot more physical discomfort, I think, with oppression. It's kind of like the lead up to possession, as opposed to obsession, which I still kind of maybe think obsession is just a higher degree because of the word itself. Obsession tends to imply that you're obsessed. I think obsession has a little bit more to do with the actual, like with you, the possessed individual, meaning that you now are engaging in like, hey, why am I, acting in this type of behavior? Why am I doing these things? Or maybe you start to like pick up some books about demons and you're really just obsessed about what's going on. I know that I think it was Father Amorth had a hard time with this one because it resembles mental illness so much. This is that's, I guess, part of possession, or that stage of possession, in which I guess resembles more of a mental health issue is the obsession part. I think that might be helpful for you to understand it better, as opposed to oppression. I think oppression is more of like a physical illness. That's the way I think of it, like someone who's sick with the flu. That to me is what oppression looks like, as opposed to, I'm sorry. Yeah.
So
Yeah,
so to you, that would be the level that a person would start to physically present that there was this kind of a thing going on.
So the oppression part, yeah, that to me seems to be, but also even before that, I know that like infestation part where it starts, affecting the house, that can come at any of these points. I'm not saying that you wouldn't be able to notice it with the person as well, but for me, it was always, that oppression part. That seems, everything I've read seems to line up with like, hey, that they just look oppressed.
Right.
I guess is the easiest way for me to say it, as opposed to the obsession being more of a mental side. I guess that's that's a better way of putting it. The obsession is more of the mental agony, and then the oppression is more of the physical part of it. Yeah, and I know in the past we've talked about one, like I said, flowing from each other, but I think it makes more sense now to just look at it as, like I said, on a spectrum of any given one of these can happen at any given time throughout the process of possession. And it doesn't mean that like they have to happen in order. It doesn't mean they can't all be happening at the same time. If there's one thing I've learned over the years, it's that, whatever we think we know, we really don't know regarding these things.
Was there something else that you needed to say about that process?
Yeah, I just want to talk about one of the last couple of things there. So like, from history on to now, and there's cases of possession going back, long before the Catholic Church, which informs us that, maybe this stuff has been around for a long time. I'm looking at it again as a Catholic, theologian, because that's my wheelhouse. That's where I'm at. But, up until, possession, which is something everyone, asks me about in particular, another step or phase of that is what they call diabolical subjugation or dependence. And that is in the past when I've talked about curses, curses placed upon you, or you engaging in quote unquote black magic, stuff like that, or kind of reaching out and attempting, to do this stuff on your own, is like another level of possession that you can reach. And the unfortunate part of the curses is that you have nothing to do with it. The other one is like you're kind of like actively going out there and being like, hey, like, I'm going to sell my soul and all this other stuff. It's another kind of level, I guess, because, there's a huge degree to which God is involved in this. There's a huge degree to which, you have angels involved in all this stuff too. And the more free will you give up, the less involved they are, if that makes sense. So yeah, I wanted to just mention that. I know I had talked about integration in the past, which is the type of possession that results in the complete integration of the demonic entity in your spirit, your soul. I know the only kind of way back from that is divine intervention. I think that the story of Douglas Dean, I think that was his name, the whole exorcist story based on that whole thing by Peter Blatty was a case of integration from what I understand.
How many full cases of integration has there been recorded?
I don't know, but there's something interesting because even like it's kind of like common knowledge, I guess, in certain circles that there are a lot more exorcisms happening today than like maybe ever. But we don't hear about them at all unless they go south. If something goes south and someone dies, like it's all over the place. Like forget it. You know what I mean? It's like mainstream news. Like these people are nuts. These people are kooks. I can't believe we still did this. But like the fact that they're just happening all the time, like no one cares if no one dies, which is kind of part and parcel for the news. So like how to track that, unless you had inside baseball on that, I'd have no idea how to track that.
Now, what about something that you touched on earlier as far as titles go? What would you have to do to be able to call yourself a demonologist? Does that mean you would have to perform? I mean, I know there's exorcists, but would you have to perform a couple of exorcisms and then steep yourself more in that side of things?
So I think, and this is a good question, because certainly like credibility, right? In your line of work, anyone doing a podcast, you're going to want to talk to someone who's credible. You don't have a demonology degree. There's not something you hang on a wall that says, hey, what is it? Master of demonological studies.
That would be bad at the bone, though.
It would be rad. But so I think what happens is mostly the title demonologist is probably like an official title from a church, from the church. I think like, Father Amorth, he's an exorcist who writes about his knowledge on demons. He's a legitimate demonologist. You know what I mean? That to me is kind of like, unless you're in it and you're doing the work, and you are an exorcist and you're, in it, then that's why I've always called myself an amateur demonologist. It's like, yeah, I like most people, like, read some books, have some discussions about it. I'm fortunate enough to have a bit of, a higher education background, but I would still never ever call myself an actual demonologist, even though many people I've met over the years have. I think, and the record will show, that I don't think I ever have, which is fine. I'm not like splitting hairs here or anything. I think even you've called me the resident demonologist.
Yes, you are my resident demonologist. Yes, and I will continue that title.
And that's fine. As long as I'm not walking around saying it, I guess. If you want to ascribe me the ITF demonologist, I will accept that.
I mean, we've had entire episodes, and in fact, it wasn't that long ago that we had a couple of Patreon episodes dedicated specifically to talking about specific demons, what they look like, what they like to do, their
Yeah, we have.
MOs. I mean, you have your favorite demon is Andreas. Andreas? I don't know
Yeah.
how to say that. And then mine is Mr. Owl Dude Stolas. I love
Yeah.
Stolas. So, we've talked a lot about this stuff. And
We have, yeah.
on, forgive me, probably should have looked this up, but I think it was one of the latter main feed episodes, either 265 or 366. I would hazard to say it's 366. But you have been in the presence of someone that you wholeheartedly believed was possessed. And I'm not expecting you to go back
Yeah.
through that, but there's so much that we have covered. It really is just astonishing. So, and you've had a lot of experiences yourself.
Yeah, and that is really what I think this show is about for me. Is kind of being like, hey, if this is the type of stuff that interests you, like we have an entire catalog of it. You know what I mean? Some good, some great.
Yeah.
Certainly, that experience with that lady was terrifying for me, and it's hard. Like with anything else in the paranormal world, a lot of this stuff goes on feeling, and I can't make you or really explain how I felt adequately enough, in that room with her and the shaman. It was just something where you had to be there. But I come on, I do my best and talk about it. But she was someone who we believe was struck by a curse, cursed in the womb. That's so the story goes with that one.
So with Catholicism, do they touch on curses and how you might be able to deal with a curse? Is that something that is written about?
Yeah. Oh God, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, the whole evil eye thing. All the Italian Americans growing up in Rhode Island, they wear like the bull horns on their neck to prevent them from the evil eye. I mean, preventing yourself from curses translates to witchcraft, translates to all that stuff. It is a big part of Catholicism, protecting yourself from all that stuff for sure. But like I said, if you're in an unfortunate circumstance where you're cursed in the womb, something horrible like that, you may have a life that you kind of have to spend a lot of time working, maybe actively engage in some type of spiritual warfare, which is unfortunate, I think, for the person. But I think Father Amorth has said at times, like, there's an element, and maybe not him, maybe I'm exaggerating, but there's an element of people who get possessed and people who suffer. There's an element of godliness or Christliness to those people, as far as like them suffering in that way. Like if you're suffering in that way and you can overcome it and kind of stay true and all this other stuff, there's an element there that kind of makes your life a little bit holier, I think. So yeah, while if you're cursed and that's a really awful situation, you can certainly come out of it and living possibly a holier life than someone who doesn't have, and I hate to call it an opportunity, but it's kind of, what I'm saying.
We were texting, this was probably almost going on 2 weeks ago now, about this episode. And then I said, oh, it's perfect timing. I'm watching Constantine, which I love that movie. And then I said, well, of course, this means that I'll have to bring up what movies about demons or demonic possession do you think got it pretty damn close to right?
So The Right is one. That one with Anthony Hopkins.
Anthony, yeah.
That one pretty well nails it. I talked to the priest, who, not the guy in the movie, obviously, not the actor, but the priest whom the actor portrayed. I had talked to him at one point. He's out in San Jose. He does youth ministries. He's an exorcist. It's been so long ago, his name actually escapes me. But I had some email correspondence with him, and I had an opportunity to ask him about the film, and he said it was pretty well spot on, aside from the obvious Hollywood drum ups and things like that. But like the nails manifesting and coming out of people's mouths, and like the toad, which was a great episode that you and I did, a little toad hopping across the floor that came out of someone's mouth.
God.
The Right does a great job. Certainly The Exorcist does a great job. But even things like Constantine have elements of truth in them. As entertaining and as cool as that movie is, and I think some people would write it off as 100% insanity. There are elements in there that are, that I've seen. I can't recall them at the moment, but I remember seeing things and be like, oh yeah, that's pretty well accurate. So yeah, I think there's a little bit of nugget of truth in a lot of them. Yeah.
So in Constantine, a constant theme was hell,
Wow.
right? You like that? Huh? Yeah. That just happened, people. No,
That was
so
awesome.
so we have spoken, I know, ad nauseum about hell because I'm so fascinated by, is it just
Yeah.
an idea? Is it an actual place? Like, because when you watch a movie like Constantine, the idea was her twin sister committed
Yeah.
suicide, and of course, very naughty in some religious circles to commit suicide. So she had been sent to hell, and it was a real place filled with these hideous demons, and they didn't show her being tortured, I suppose, for movie purposes, but that was the idea. Now, what about, because there are best-selling books and people that talk about the fact that they have been to an actual place that is quite similar to what is portrayed in Constantine. What are your thoughts on that?
So hell, is largely like a New Testament thing. I think before that, it's like, Gehenna. You have other types of underworld type situations going on. The Catholic Church position on hell, it is part of Catholic dogma, which it's part of scripture. It's a place. It's, the punishment is eternal. That's, it's not something that they mince words on. Same with the devil, same with demons. Like this is all part of Catholic dogma. So it's, based on that, like, yeah, but having read the Divine Comedy, Dante's Divine Comedy and the Inferno, and knowing the historical importance of that and how that kind of really shaped the way in which we look at hell, I think there's something to be said there too, as far as like what hell is and where it is and how it looks and what the torment may be like. I think a lot of that does come from Dante. I have been told repeatedly that hell is the absence of God. That's what it is. So as to whether or not you can like even begin to understand or even can conceive of what that would be like if you're, Catholic, that would be nuts. You know what I mean? So the idea that someone could maybe be transported to that state of mind doesn't seem that far out of the realm of possibility to me. I think that's what's happening in those stories. I think people are saying like, hey, I was in hell. And I think they were maybe transported into a brief situation in which that they were removed from God. And that is essentially what hell, so that's the Catholic, I think, answer for that. It's also kind of how I feel personally about it. Just going over things, as far as like, the pictures and the Renaissance record, or just any type of painting over the years. There's some pretty wild, pretty wild stuff out there, as to whether it looks like that. I mean, that's certainly like, artistic interpretation, I suppose. Yeah,
But do
Hieronymus
you
Bosch,
feel?
Garden of Earthly Delights.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh,
go ahead.
yes, Bosch is amazing. I would
I have
love.
that painting at work.
You do? I
Yeah,
love
it's right
Hieronymus
above my
Bosch.
desk. Everyone's like, "What's that?"
If I ever got a back piece, it would be Bosch. Woe be the tattoo artist that would have to try to do all those details.
Oddly enough, because I have, I have my ink and all that.
Yeah.
Hard to do. Very hard to do.
Yeah,
So
I'd
just
say so. You got little
well, not
dudes
just
eating
that, but
other little dudes, and
there's no lines. Like it's all paint. There's
right,
no, I'm not
right,
a tattoo artist, but they've said to me like, there's no lines. Like
right.
it would be weird.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because it's these sprawling pieces, but there's not, in some aspects, there's no depth to it, if that makes sense. I don't know, but
Yeah, well,
yeah,
there's things flow
it's
from
just
one thing to
very
another. I mean, you see
strange.
traditional tattoos; they have very, defined lines.
Yeah.
But also too, before we go on, I just things set forth, as like something that's divinely revealed. That's what I mean by dogma. Is that like, hey, this has been something divinely revealed. It's part of our church. That's what dogma is, essentially. Well, at least when I use it. Yeah. So go ahead, in case anyone out there was thinking, didn't know what I meant by that.
So you said hell could just be the absence of God. So then, I mean, wouldn't purgatory kind of be like a slightly higher level of hell? I don't know if that's a dumb question, but
No, that's a good question. They're all good questions. That's interesting. I don't Purgatory is so weird. It's such an interesting topic. This place of like in non-existence, but also like that God may or kind of have his eye on it in some way, like without a hand in it, if that makes sense. I don't, in by that virtue alone, it would be better infinitely than hell if God had some type of an interest in purgatory. But yeah, it's so weird because it was always kind of this place of like, where infants went if they died before they were baptized, and that's like a weird place if you think like that's like this weird metaphysical place of where just those folks are. It's just a strange thing to consider purgatory that.
So the unbaptized babies, because we've heard that a
Yeah.
lot, right? That's
Yeah, yeah,
been
yeah.
since the beginning of everything we've heard about. You got to baptize that baby ASAP.
Right.
Well, how is that baby's soul supposed to get out of purgatory, or doesn't it ever?
It can. I'm not the best as far as purgatory goes, but there's a way. So purgatory, my understanding of purgatory is that it's a cleansing fire. No, it's you're in purgatory for a certain amount of time. You're not in purgatory forever. And I have also learned that everybody goes to purgatory. It's a purifying fire. You can't be walking around planet Earth, with all these crazy things. You know what I mean? Diseases, other people, all this gnarly stuff that the devil's throwing at you every day. Like the earth is a very dirty place. I mean, look at that picture, the Garden of Earthly Delights by Ron Paul. That middle panel, it got really messed up really quick.
Yeah.
And it's like, so before you can have your beatific vision and see the face of God and stand before God, you need to be purified. Your soul that's been hanging around with you down here needs to be purified. So you go to purgatory, depending on how pure your soul is how long you stay there. And I think the idea with the unbaptized kids is like they haven't had a chance to experience earth. So like their souls need a lot of, I guess, tempering, to use the metaphor. Does that make sense?
So like heaven's waiting room where you have to get blasted like in the movie
Yes,
Outbreak. Like you
yes.
have to go from the sick
Yes.
room to the little room where you get blasted with the clean air. And
Yep.
then poof, into heaven you go.
Yep. It's a good analogy.
Yeah, that's but what about us adults? So I know that you said that all of us go there,
Yeah.
but this is all conjecture, of course. We all go there, but not all of us have the same experience, nor do we make the same choices on Earth. So what do you think the levels are of? Oh, well, you did this, so you're going to be there for 100 years.
Right.
Oh, you did this, you're going to be there 1,000
Right.
years or whatever it is.
Right. And kind of like a reverse mortgage on your
Yeah,
soul.
exactly.
No, I don't know. There's not a lot of writing on purgatory. Not certainly. I mean, I haven't come across a lot. I think it's just, yeah, it's like one of those mysteries.
Gotcha. That's so cool. No, I love this stuff. I
Yeah, yeah,
love
yeah.
it. That's why we have about 1,800 episodes with 3,500 hours of content for everybody.
It's true. And what's funny too, because I feel like at one point, not criticism's the wrong word, but I've received some, I don't know, blowback maybe of like Catholic theology or the Catholic Church. Like this has always been like kind of where I come from, where I talk about. I'm not like a great Catholic. You know what I mean? I'm not even someone who goes around and proselytizes. I'm not good at any of that stuff. I really don't go to church. So it's interesting. These conversations generally, people are like, they want to talk about religion, and religious conversations can get really heated really quick. People are more than happy to die on the hill of their religious, choice. That's never been me. I've kind of always approached Catholicism as an outsider. Yeah,
All right. So, my last question about hell, because I love talking about
Yeah.
hell, is how many religions cite there even being something like a hell where you go if
Ooh,
you're
wow, that's
really
good.
bad?
Yeah, I mean, I off the top of my head, I have no idea. A number of them do, though. I mean, if you think of hell as an underworld, I mean, I think so many of them have an underworld situation going on. And I don't know if it's like bad or good. Like, obviously the stuff like Gehenna or Hades, things like that. There's a lot of that stuff going on. Again, I think this goes back to animism. We're trying to like make everything we see like our culture and like our society, and like we have prisons and jails, and we try to keep people in line who do bad things. And I think, large in part, people from all walks of life hope, I guess, that, people who do bad things will pay for it, in this world or the next. So yeah, I think I'm pretty sure it's a part of, the majority of any type of organized faith.
I lied one more. If one does go to hell, well, the Catholic standpoint on this is you never leave that place.
Nope. You are stuck there.
Unless Constantine goes, I'll take your place.
So it's interesting. That's what I was saying earlier. It is part of Catholic dogma. It is eternal. Yeah, I mean, if as far as that's concerned, you go there, you're stuck there.
You're toast, buddy.
Yeah, I mean, look, for everything I'm saying, there's always an alternate argument. There is an idea that in the end, is it apostasis? I think that's called apostasis. Or apostasis.
I don't know, but that's a cool word. I'm not going to try to say it.
Yeah, there's so much stuff. There's this idea that in the end, everything is saved. That would include all the demons and the devil.
Well, that's a lovely thought, but damn.
Right, and it's this crazy, this is crazy theological, idea.
We do not want people to think that, because they're already shitty enough to. I mean, we're crappy enough to each other, to.
I mean, the whole idea
I can do anything.
The devil, being able to be redeemed is very heretical. Anyway, the whole pride thing and
right.
It's a pretty heretical idea, but it's out there. I mean, this is not the first time it's been talked about.
Yeah, well, I don't think we've talked about that. That is very interesting, and I am not going to try to say that word ever.
I know, I could barely say it.
No, you did great. I was like, "Woo, I like that word." I don't hear a lot of new words. All right, so before we get to the Patreon questions for you, did you need to get a little more off your chest about how you're, feeling or what you're thinking? I'm not trying to make you go there, but, I wanted to give you the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we can do that now. I mean, things obviously it's been 7 years, things change, things are different. The paranormal community is a lot different. There's a lot going on now, and I certainly felt this way. If I want people to accept my experience, then I must accept their experience. I don't feel like that anymore. I don't feel like I have to accept people's experiences just at face value. And I don't feel like people have to experience or accept my experience at face value either. I think it's okay to say if you think, I think it's okay to say what's on your mind, which is weird that doesn't happen more in this community. In the past, if I wanted to say like, hey, I think that person's full of crap, I would hesitate on saying that. I don't really hesitate on that anymore. In the past, when someone would ask me, well, why would they lie? I don't feel like I need to answer that question anymore either, because people lie all the time and they don't even know they're lying. So my entire approach on that end has changed drastically, as just a general kind of, position. And I'm not trying to be closed-minded or anything like that. I think that the waters have been muddied as a result of just a rampant influx of like, hey, whatever people say, we got to take. And, a lack of people saying like, hey, man, I think you're full of it. And we won't go into particulars. I use the Dogman thing all the time as an example. I'm not going to do that here. But to me, like, there's just some stuff out there where it's like, nah, absolutely no. And I know that, like, that goes against a lot of what people talk about. Like, oh, you can't say absolutely no, you can't do that. Da, da, da. I have painted myself into corners in the past, trying to explain how, Bigfoot could be a Nephilim or something wild like that. And the fact of the matter is it's not. That's not the case. You know what I mean? Everything in the historical record that I have is just, it doesn't make any sense. Like that line of inquiry. And then, you get the flip side of that, which is, well, how can you say no? You got to leave some room to be open because it's paranormal, right? And nobody has all the answers. Just like no one can say 100% yes, you can't say 100% no. And I think that's kind of BS too. I think that, we need to leave open the ideas that we know to be true, and we need to accept those before we accept, the paranormal one. Something I hear all the time when people see cryptids. Well, it wasn't a bear. We don't have bear in this state. It's like, okay, that's a really crappy, explanation, because bears exist. So one could obviously be there, pick that option first. You know what I mean? The existing mammal over this thing, So yeah, a lot of this has changed for me over the last year and a half. As to why, you know, probably my own personal journey, maybe getting older. I've spent the last year and a half changing careers from a teacher and an adjunct professor doing a lot of teaching in the prisons. I've changed into becoming a therapist, which is vastly different, and having to kind of learn a little bit more about psychology and all that cognitive stuff, which I didn't have I had a decent background on that stuff, but I don't know. It's learning a little bit more about, my own experience and how to articulate my own experience. And just like over the years, the times I have lied or the times I have embellished and stuff like that, and just what I know about the real rational, physical world. Yeah, so that's why it's kind of happening, because there are a number of people in my life who are just flat out like laugh at what happens in these podcasts, these shows, and that's not what I'm gonna become or anything. But for a long time I was kind of like, what's wrong with them? And I think now I'm a bit more accepting of both them and us, if that makes sense. Yeah, I don't know, so that's kind of where I'm at, mentally on that topic.
And that's not to say that you do not want people to contact you, as you said in the beginning, to reach out. You still want to be in touch with folks. And that email is live period deep period no, that's KNOW period truth at gmail.com. And you can get a hold of Jon Paul that way. Were you ready for some of these questions, JP?
Yeah, and also too, the reason why I still obviously believe in the paranormal, and I'm very comfortable in my beliefs that they all kind of stem from the stuff that I'm talking about. I believe that all the encounters I've had, I can trace to some type of a demonic activity. I believe that all of the experiences that I've heard from other people, every single one, I can explain as some type of a demonic situation. Either that or some type of a cognitive lapse, a dream, a lie, or something like that. I'm at a point in my life where I feel like I can adequately, not 100%, but adequately explain comfortably to a point where I don't need to look at it anymore. You know what I mean? Or I don't need to keep beating a dead horse and keep rehashing this gremlin I saw when I was a kid. No, I'm very comfortable with that. I know that, it was very real. It was very lucid. In all likelihood, it was a dream, but I am also very open to the possibility, it was some type of a demonic encounter at a young age. And it's very possible that, there was some type of a recruitment going on. Like, I'm very open to that. But I'm also very, like I said, open to the fact that it was more than likely a dream, or some type of a trauma gap or something like that. But yeah, so that's essentially, I think, I don't know. I think that maybe as I'm getting older, I'm moving into a more mature situation. But please contact me. Still, I guess that's the end result of that.
Yes.
I still have, there's still a percentage of me that's involved in this stuff and excited about it to a degree.
Yeah, he's not going to email you back and call you a kook or anything,
No, that's not where I'm at. And I know it sounds weird because I just said, like, I'm not afraid to tell people they're full of shit. But, I think that's just a little bit because, I'm a little aggravated right now. Not now per se, but just over the past year. It's just out of control what people are claiming and doing, and all this stuff that's happening. And, like, the podcasts are like, hey, this is true. This has happened. This is gospel. And I kind of wish people would say, like, hey, this is entertainment. It might be true. Like, let's talk about it rationally, because, and this is because of the last year and my own experiences. Like, there's a lot of sick people out there, and and I talked about it when we talked about demonology. I talked about the guy out in San Jose that I talked to who said discernment was his biggest thing. When he went in to do an exorcism, discernment. Is this person, afflicted demonically, or are they mentally ill? So that was the one thing that weighed on his mind more than anything else. He says, because I can do irreparable harm to their psyche if they're mentally ill. And that to me has always been like the tipping point, or always on everything. So when I listen to stuff and I hear people talk on shows and I see them on TV, and I'm like, there's some type of obvious thing happening there with them, and it's just it's seeing them get sicker as a result of someone else with the inability to say, "Hey, take a step back. I don't believe you," or you know what I mean? Like it just seems. I don't know. It seems inappropriate at times, and I don't know. It just seems kind of strange.
So, talking about Dogman, because I in no way think that Dogman is a living, breathing, has a mommy and daddy, and they were born and bred in a den, and mommy carries them around in her mouth like wolves do or something. I think that there's something else, obviously.
Yeah.
Do you think that there is a chance that that is some kind of a demonic entity?
So yes, the short answer is yes. In some way, shape, or form, I know that like bears with mange exist. Kangaroos are kept as pets. It's probably something like that, or people are lying. But I also know that through everything I've read, demons can manifest physically, and when they do that, it's usually a little jacked up. It's usually a little weird. It usually can't get things right or the form right. And obviously their intentions are not great. So this sense of people have with the dogman phenomenon of this really horrific malevolent force, that all kind of syncs up. So yeah, I've certainly left room for it, and certainly in my area, my wheelhouse of the paranormal, for it to be some type of a demonic encounter. I believe I've left room for that much. Yeah.
Something that has come up in several, not every, but just like not every Bigfoot encounter is going to have the same attributes to it, is the attribute in some dogman encounters where there is a metallic sound. And we're talking about people that are out in the middle of the damn woods. There's not near a farm or some kind of a plant or anything like that that's going to create this sound. And these are sounds that are very close to them. And then sometimes shortly after said sound, they have an experience with something like a dogman. Is there anything from your wheelhouse, right? I'm asking you from your knowledge pool that would coincide with that you could go, well, actually, that kind of makes sense from my perspective.
So no, the only thing that really, is the whole smelling of, brimstone and sulfur. That's like something that I can kind of see from my point of view. As far as sound, and especially that sound, that's a hard one to kind of reconcile. It's also hard to look at individual elements of a story without looking at the whole story. So.
No, thank you for touching on that. All right, well, what do you say we get to some of these Patreon questions? All right, first up, this is from Jim. And Jim says, I worked for some years in a religious nonprofit where I spent a lot of time with pastors who expressed concern over young people messing with spirit boards while their parents were away, leading to infestations and possessions. Have you seen a similar increase, especially with teenagers?
So yeah, there's the short answer to that as well. Out in San Jose, the priest I was talking to, the exorcist, he ran that youth ministry, and I remember I was like, well, wow, isn't it like a little young to be teaching demonology to kids? And he's like, no, absolutely not. They're the ones out there doing the more riskier stuff, like playing with spirit boards, and demons don't care how old you are. They will gladly come on and get involved with you. Maybe even more so when you're younger. Yeah, I think that especially nowadays, there's all sorts of stuff on the internet about spirit boards and the thing we love, the psychomantium, all these interesting ways that people are sharing with each other on how to like kind of interact with that other side. If it's there, and like I said, people are going to accuse me out of talking both sides of my mouth, and for what it's worth, it's probably my inability to articulate my exact position. But for whatever other side is there, I do believe that it does look back when you start looking at it. So yeah, young people playing with spirit boards and doing that stuff, they're seeing it more. They replicate what they see, and like I said, there's more, everything I've read, newer type of journals saying there's more exorcisms happening now than ever before. That would explain it, yeah.
Still waiting for your blueprint for your psychomantium, but I guess another time, right? All right. Dave wants
Coolest
to
name
know.
ever.
What's that?
The coolest name
It,
of anything ever.
it really is. It really is. And anytime it comes up, I'm always excited to talk about it. And
I know.
that's one word I will say over and over again if I get the chance. All right. Dave wants to know, and I'll let you answer the first question, and he has a second one, is what country has recorded the most demonic possessions?
I'll bet you know the answer to this.
Italy?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. Father Remorse wrote a book before he passed. It was pretty good. I can't remember the damn name of it. But, obviously being in Italy, being that close to it, it's an interesting situation, right? Because you're right there. You're next to the holiest thing, right? The Vatican. And it's like, why has it happened there? And we've talked about the different types of demons. I know we've talked about clean demons, the ones who explicitly are there to kind of possess people of the cloth, priests and nuns, and I think there's something to be said for, as the closer you are to it, the more it wants to kick and scream and claw back. Also, cases of possession, that get investigated, how are they measuring what, this metric? Like, how are they coming out with the numbers for it? Are they, saying like, hey, we had 500 cases. Is that like verified cases? Because I certainly, people are seeing it more. It's just, it creates its own kind of culture, I guess, around it. It's more accepted over there. The whole thing, because I mean, as far as like, if someone has something wrong, if you're Catholic and you're like devout Catholic, and something's going on, you may be more apt to call it possession than someone else who may call it something. You know what I mean? So you may want to have it investigated as such. So that, yeah, it definitely, it does not surprise me.
All right. Second part is faith in a higher power enough to combat demons? And if not, what would be?
So it is. At the end of every chapter I read, there's always this little blurb that says, in the end, like nothing beats like nothing kicks like prayer does. And it's like, yeah, you get it. This relationship to like, priests and exorcists, they're not the ones who are, actually in there getting their hand. I mean, they're not the ones removing the demon. God does all that stuff. So they're invoking the name of God. They're asking God to intercede. They're asking the archangels and the Blessed Mother to intercede on their behalf. Like that. So you can interact with all of that through prayer and your own, type of relationship. And this is, kind of where, if it's the Dave I'm thinking of, we've talked in the past about Catholic and Christian faith and how Christians can have that personal relationship with Christ that Catholics don't necessarily get. But, either way, like your relationship with prayer and God should be sufficient. All this extra stuff, could help, right? Because like we talked about the different steps and phases, the end result, meaning that your soul is saved, is like the important thing. That's the important thing. You still may suffer, and to that extent, then maybe charms and relics and prayers to Saint Michael and things like that, they help too. Coming together and having the exorcist come out and stuff like that. Those things they're helpful, I think, for the symptoms of possession, if that makes sense. But for the overall cure, I think that prayer is enough.
All right. So MJ came forth with, honestly, I guess I could call this like demon logistics, which are some of my favorite things to talk about with you. And I know that we have covered some of probably these questions before, but I don't give a crap. This is some of my favorite stuff to talk with you about. And I guess, yeah, for lack of a better term, demon logistics. So here we go. Here's a few different questions
awesome.
from MJ. Do demons present as physical forms?
Yeah. We talked about that briefly with the Dogman thing. Like I said, the typically from the stuff that I've read, it's always as a shadow figure, what we would call a shadow figure, something that's blacker than black, but also something that's not quite there, missing arms, missing a head, kind of incorporeal, but at the same time corporeal, so somewhat physical. Yeah. I mean, for them to interact with the physical plane, they don't necessarily have to be physical. I think that it makes more sense that they would be. Yeah, 100%.
Before we go on with MJ's questions, real quick from me, can they choose a different form each and every time if they wanted to?
I don't know how much agency they have over like going from one thing to the next. I think what happens is they're entering into, because they like time doesn't apply to them. Time, space, position, it doesn't matter to them. I think if they find themselves kind of stationary in one time, in one place, it's probably like a mad dash to try to, assemble themselves into like a thing that can be, that the brain can identify. To me, that's kind of makes sense. Because if it was just this amorphous blob, which I've heard stories of that stuff too, yeah.
You know what's kind of dopey about them, though, is because you've said many times that they just can't really get it right. But if they're coming into this realm as the same thing every time, can't they gosh damn get it right once, like fully 100% right?
What's dopey about them? That's awesome. I mean, whenever I think of like stuff like that, like there is the opposing force of God and good, and I'm sure that opposing force doesn't make it easy. I'm sure that there are these bizarre, esoteric metaphysical laws that these things must abide. It may have something to do with that, but yeah, you would think.
So it's a situation where God is like, "Thou shalt have a backwards foot," and then that way it's a giveaway.
Or it's like, the forms of who knows, but yeah, it's a good one.
All right, next part for MJ. I love these kind of questions. My fave. Okay, do they seem to eat or have bodily functions when they're here with us?
So I've never seen anything like that. I don't think there's a need for them to do that. Certainly if they're in a body and there's a case of possession, the human can do all those things. Eat and bodily functions and all that stuff. As far as they're concerned, we talked about them. Buy and try locating and the ability to possess multiple people over multiple spaces and times all in once. So yeah, there's no reason for them to be like having a sandwich.
All right, so this one, let me think here, because how do I want to phrase this? Do they would demons?
That to me, by the way, blows my mind.
What?
The fact that one demon can possess like a 6-year-old in Rhode Island and a 62-year-old in like Las Vegas, and then an 18-year-old in like third century, like I don't know, like to me, like all at once, like that to me.
And that's a pretty high level demon, right? I mean, that's a really powerful demon. Or do they all have reign to do that?
I don't know. I would think that they would have to be some type of a skill level than some mindless thrall.
And that's why I love talking to you, because you're okay saying, I don't really know, but here's the conjecture that I have on that subject. More people need to be okay saying that. And that's where you're coming from. And I get that. I totally get that. So would a demon prefer to come through as kind of its own quote unquote physical form, or would it prefer, I think I know the answer, but would it prefer, or is it more powerful somehow? Or does it get more of a high five from other demons if it inhabits us?
That's interesting. So I know we talked about animism or anthropomorphism. A lot of these questions we're trying to put human-like characteristics on these things. And it doesn't quite work. This idea that like just because there's ranks and there's a hellish elite and there's a, what I mean? Just because we kind of structured them like that doesn't mean that it behaves, if it even existed like that, in the same way our structure does. So those questions are super hard to even speculate upon.
Yeah. I just wonder if he's like, hey, Billy, really messed old so-and-so up last night, and how long are you going to be there? Are you going to be renting that space for a long time or what? Like, what conversations are they having?
I like that. I mean, the whole C.S. Lewis's The Screw Tape Letters, it talks about that. Like, it's a great book where one demon is coaching another and being like, "Come on, dude! Like, try harder. Like, why is your guy like not in hell yet?
Put me in, coach. Do they have those conversations? Right. Do they have the put me in, coach conversations with their their higher ups? Right? Like that is fascinating to me.
I got this.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
employee of the month type thing. A little
Demon of the month.
demon of the month.
Possessor
Little
of the
guy in a
month.
little office somewhere, pushing a pencil, making copies.
I just imagine like a Dwight with the tie and the white
Yes,
shirt and the pocket protector, and he's like smiling in the photo. Oh God.
demon of the month.
God, now we're gonna be struck down by the whatever. Stolas is coming for me, and Andreas is coming for you, buddy, because we're
Your
making
boy.
fun of the demons now.
I will say that in the 7 years I've been doing this, no one has come for me.
That's true. That's true. We're pretty
So,
safe. We're all right. We've
yeah.
had a lot of laughs at their expense, so I think we're
Yes,
okay.
we have.
All right. Well, in closing, did you want to give out your email address one last time? And any
Yeah,
closing thoughts, of
live.
course.
Sorry, stepped all over you there. Live.deep.truth. No, live.deep.know.truth at gmail.com. Live deep, no truth, separated by periods is another
Yes.
way to say that. Perhaps an easier way. But yeah, if you want, I know that, it sounds like I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth with the, hey, this is real, this isn't real, this is true, this isn't true. I think what is happening to me, and I think what happens to all, healthy people is they go through life and their minds and opinions change on certain things. And I think that's part of a healthy progression throughout all this stuff. But I am still interested in it, and I would like very much people to reach out. I'm not really concerned with ghost stories. I'm more concerned with, someone who has what they believe to be a pretty fleshed out, hey, I really do think this is a case of demonic, subjugation, possession, obsession, oppression, demonic siege, poltergeist activity that is of a demonic nature. And I think there are ways that we can, seeing a Civil War ghost is not necessarily what I'm looking for. Also, like the cryptid stuff, I'm off that for now. But yeah, I'm interested to hear it. For my own sake, the idea of compiling some type of a book, I think is cool. It's something I've not ruled out. I do have some stories from over the years that I've just kind of, put away. The idea of kind of like collecting stories is just, someone who's living life here on planet Earth and collecting stories and sharing them with next generations. I think that's cool. I think more often than not, that's what I'm going to end up doing with these stories. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I'm at. I'm not in a position anymore where I want to justify or explain why I believe certain things or argue over certain points. Lots of what I talk about, and that's why I know it was boring, but that's why I always lay the foundation with the history at the beginning, because I think it ratifies it, justifies it in some way, shape, or form, knowing that this is a paranormal area, something that we discuss in these, whatever, these types of podcasts, but it's got a historical foundation. Certainly, religion is a part of life, and then this kind of goes hand in hand with that. So I very much like it if you had something to share. It would be cool. I would read it. It'd be cool to have, and may come and turn it to something someday.
I will make sure to link that email address in the show notes for this episode at intothefrayradio.com. Well, JP, thank you for another fantastic chat. I look forward to our next one, and that's all I'm going to say, okay?